According to Sporting Arms and Ammunition Manufacturers Institute, or SAAMI, the use of military 5.56 by 45 NATO ammunition in a sporting rifle's chambered for .223 Remington cartridges can lead to higher than normal chamber pressures and possible hazards to the gun, the user, and bystanders. Hi guys, I've been wanting to make this this video for quite some time. And I want to talk about the differences between the 5.56 by 45 NATO and the SAAMI chambered .223 Remington. The reason why I do want to make this video is because a lot of people think that these two different cartridges are interchangeable and one and the same, and that's just not the case. There are differences, and what we'll do is we'll go through and talk about those differences and kind of break it down onto a basic level as to why you do certain things and why you don't do certain things. I'm not an expert on this stuff, and I've kind of just learned it on my own, and so take it with a grain of salt, and always remember to do your own research. And remember that if you guys own one of these cartridges, or one of these guns chambered in these cartridges, do your research and know your ins and outs. It's important to know the important factors with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and talk about the differences between the physical differences between the bullets, or the rounds, and I'm going to talk about the chamber differences. I'm going to talk about the differences between the 5.56 NATO, the wild chambering, and the .223 chambering. And then I'm also going to talk about why I choose the 5.56 as a round of choice for my bulk ammo. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about reliability and kind of what to look for between the three. So, okay, first what we want to talk about is the differences between the physical differences between the two different rounds. One of the major differences, or one thing that people don't understand, is that there are some actual dimensional differences between the 5.56 and the .223. One of the most important dimensions that we see is that we actually have a shorter neck length on the 5.56 by 2/1000ths of an inch. And the reason why they do that is because in a battlefield type situation, you could be firing a lot of rounds in between cleanings, and so what they do is they've kind of lessened the tolerances a bit to allow for these rounds to continue to function in a dirty chamber. And so like the neck length being shortened, that's one of those things that is taken into consideration. So that's one of the reasons for that. And by the way, if I'm wrong in any of these, in any of my facts, or you feel that I'm off in a little bit, please either submit a video response or a comment, and let's correct it. Let's get some real good, accurate information for the folks out there. So. One of the other differences is the 5.56 by 45 NATO actually has thicker brass in its casing than that of the .223 Remington. And why that is an important thing to note is that if you do hand load, you need to know that your internal dimensions are going to be smaller because of the thicker brass involved in those casings. What you have here on the end is we have a hand load that is, this is a Nosler ballistics tip, and it's actually loaded into a M193 Lake City brass casing, which is the same casing on this round here. Now this has been resized, and it's been resized more to a .223 style dimension. But it is a hand load, and it's hand loaded with 5.56 ammunition. So you want to be aware that the same amount of powder in a 5.56 casing will result in higher pressures than that of a standard .223. So that's a difference there. Another difference is in the way they're loaded. Your factory .223 ammo. This is a Remington .223 with a 55 grain bullet, and this is a Federal .223 with a 55 grain bullet. This is the M193. This is your typical military ball 55 grain, and then you have the M855 penetrator, which is a 62 grain steel core round there. So that's what these are, and that's that hand load. Your pressures on a 5.56 are typically in the area of about 60,000 copper units of pressure, whereas the 223 is in the 50,000 area of copper units of pressure. And so you're looking at a 10,000 copper units of pressure difference between these two rounds. Now if you put this round into a 223 chamber, which we'll talk about why that's not a good thing, you're actually going to create higher chamber pressures, dangerously higher chamber pressures, and you can actually cause the chamber to give way on this round. So okay, so that's really some of your major differences. Okay, another thing that you can notice that is different here between the 5.56 and the at least the commercial 223 rounds that we have here in front of you is we have this discoloration of the brass, and what this is called it's called annealing. And what it is it's actually been heat treated. Now the difference between brass and steel is that when you heat treat steel, you're actually going to make it harder and more brittle. Whereas if you heat treat brass, you actually make it softer. And so this annealing, or this heat treat that they've put on the brass, is actually to make it softer and more pliable. And the reason why they do that is when they actually go to shape the actual brass itself. Brass, the only way you can harden brass is by working it. Okay, so actually mechanically working the brass will make the brass harder. And so they anneal it to bring it back to its original softness. Okay, and so it is my understanding, though, that most of your factory ammo is also annealed. The difference being that once it has been annealed, they actually polish off the annealing marks here. So you can see that these have both been annealed, and these have probably also been annealed, but they have polished the brass afterwards. Now I think the reason why that they leave those annealing marks on is to make sure that they actually have been annealed. So it's part of the inspection process that the military requires of Lake City to go through. So anyway, that's annealing. So let's move on to chamber differences. And one of the things I want to do here is I want to read from an article out of the American Rifleman magazine, and this was in September 2007. And this is written by a man named Bryce Tosley, and he's talking about a little bit of the difference between the chambers of the 5.56 and the 223. And he says the throat, which is also commonly called the lead, which is defined as the portion of the barrel directly in front of the chamber where the rifling has been conically removed to allow room for the seated bullet. Lead in the 223 Remington chamber is usually .085, while in the 5.56 by 45 millimeter chamber, the lead is typically .162, or almost twice as much as the 223 chamber. Also, the throat angle is different between the two chambers, and that can affect pressure rise and peak pressure. Okay, and it goes on to say the SAAMI SAAMI regulates cartridge overall length, but not bullet ogive. Okay, the shape of the ogive can significantly affect how far the bullet jumps before contacting the rifling. Some 5.56 bullets have an ogive suitable for 5.56 chambering with the longer throat, but if they were chambered in a 223 Remington, it would result in very little, if any, jump to the rifling. This can increase pressure. Remember, the 5.56 by 45 millimeter already starts out at a higher pressure. So that's 60,000 CUPs versus 50,000 CUPs. If the higher pressure 55 by 45 5.56 by 45 millimeter cartridge is then loaded into a 223 Remington, firearm with a short throat, the combination of the two can raise chamber pressures. Okay, so let me break that article down for you here into simpler terms. In a 5.56, you have a longer throat, okay, or a longer lead. And what that allows for is it allows for the bullet to actually leave the cartridge a bit before it contacts the rifling. And so it actually dissipates some of the pressure before it contacts the riflings. So that actually dissipates some of that higher pressure. Now if you put that same round into a .223, there's less jump between the rifling, or between the bullet ogive, which is the curve of the bullet, and the rifling. And so it hits that rifling sooner and therefore builds up pressure more inside the chamber. So you start off with a higher pressure round and then add peak pressure to it because of resistance or less jump to the rifling, and you're looking at a very dangerous situation. So that's one of the major differences there between the chamber of the 5.56 and .223. Now there is what's called a wild chambering, which is very common in the Rock River Arms AR-15s, and there's quite a few other ones out there. People term the wild chamber as a match chamber, but really what it is it's an intermediate chamber between the 5.56 and the .223. And I think originally, now you'll have to, if anybody knows or anything more about this, please correct me if I get this wrong, but from what I understand, a wild chambering was originally designed to accommodate longer overall length bullets, like 80 grain bullets that were typically not used in AR-15s. It's more of an intermediate chambering between the 5.56 and the .223. So the dimensions are right in the middle. You can fire a 5.56 by 45 out of a wild chambering. So it works very similar to a 5.56 chambering, but they say that the accuracy goes up a bit because the wild chambering isn't as loose as a 5.56. So that's a little bit of the difference there between the chambering. Okay, I've got an interesting statement by a man named Giles Stock. He spoke at a conference in Reno, an IALEFI conference, and he was talking about the NATO chambering versus the .223 chambering. And what he says is that obviously the NATO has a longer lead, or a longer throat than the .223, and so he said and his quote, he's quoted saying, "SAAMI chambers are designed for increased accuracy, but will yield dangerously high pressures in guns using military ammo, and or which are subject to high volume shooting. Under such pressures, a primer may back out completely, drop into the action, and cause the firearm to stop working." So what he's talking about is it can actually compromise the primer and actually cause malfunctions in the gun more often. The other thing to consider really in reliability, talking between the two, is that a gun that is designed for a 5.56 may not cycle as well with the lesser pressured round in the .223. I've never ran into that myself. I've always had real good luck with firing .223 in my 5.56 chamberings, but I have heard of those problems where higher spring rates and things like that can actually cause malfunctions due to lower pressure .223 rounds being fired out of it. So those are something to consider in reliability. I also wanted to add in a couple little interesting tidbits about my ammo choices here. I'm a really huge fan of the M193 round, which is the 55 grain military round, and this is actually Lake City produced, or federal produced M193. This is owned by ATK, which is a U.S. corporation. The reason why I like this round so much is because it is typically a hotter round than your standard .223. And the reason why that is because it's loaded to a higher pressure, and that's essentially it, really. But my choice of weapon is a carbine length rifle, which is 16-inch barrel, and so I'm not going to get the full velocity out of your typical 223 round. Now, if I had a varminting rifle that was 20 inches to 24 inches, it wouldn't make as much of a difference. But where I am shooting a carbine length rifle, I like to have the hottest stuff I can put in it to get the most velocity out of it. Now, this round right here is typically coming out of the barrel at about 3,500 or 3,050 feet per second out of a 16-inch carbine length. Now, that'll vary quite a bit, but and these will come out typically below the 3,000 feet per second mark, more like the 2,800, 2,850 mark. And so I went with the hotter 5.56 ammunition in my rifle because of that alone. That also gives me better terminal ballistics, longer range capabilities as well in that carbine length. Now, one of the things that's kind of interesting about the construction of the M193 is that it is a full metal jacket boat tail round, so it does have a fairly good sectional density and drag coefficient, so it is pretty good for long range firing. You notice that there, right at the case neck, there is what is called, let me see if I can get this to focus a little bit better for us here. Okay, you see this kind of ringed indention into the bullet itself. This is called a cannular. Oops, let's see. I'm doing this upside down here. So the cannular is there so that it actually helps keep the round in place with the brass, and so it doesn't get what's called setback, where the round is actually pushed back into, let's see, focus here, where the round is actually pushed back into the casing, and so they put that cannular in there to kind of stabilize it in place. But what that does is it actually compromises the integrity of the bullet a bit. And so when it actually enters into, when it goes through its terminal ballistics, if there is any yaw to the bullet, which is side-to-side play, okay, it'll actually create a little compromise or a weak spot in the casing. And a lot of times, you always hear about how a 223 will fragment. Well, that is part of the area that cannular, it usually fragments along that area. And so it actually will turn in from 1 to 2 pieces or more upon fragmentation. Now, from everything I've read, the M193 will have greater probability of fragmentation when the velocities are over 2,700 feet per second. Now, out of a carbine length barrel, with a 16-inch carbine length barrel, that velocity is usually seen from distances from muzzle to about 150 yards. Past that, the bullet drops below that 2,700 feet per second. That 2,700 feet per second velocity, and therefore the reliability of fragmentation actually goes down. The other thing that I like about it is the brass tends to be higher quality in the M193, so for reloading, it's actually a little bit better from what I understand. So, okay, so anyway, that's a little bit of something about why I chose the M193. The penetrator round, people are going to ask why haven't I chosen the penetrator round? You know, it's just it's more expensive, and I do keep some of it on hand, obviously, but I don't use it as a primary shooter because it's more expensive, and that's probably about it. But yeah, I mean those are pretty much the difference. Now the M855 or the penetrator, the steel core, hasn't been shown to have as reliable of a fragmentation rate as the M195 or the M193. So that's another reason why I chose the M193. Although the M855 has a bit better terminal ballistics. So that is a comparison between the 5.56 and the 2.23 Remington. Like I said, I'm not an expert on this, and if you find that any of this information is not correct, please chime in with a video response or a comment and let us know, so that we can get as much accurate information out there as possible. And if you guys own one of these two chamberings, the 223, the Wild Chamber, or the 5.56x45 NATO, please read up on what is the best do's and don'ts and what ammunition is good and safe for all those, because it's important. So anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe if you're not. And there's going to be more videos to come. So talk to you later. See ya.